On April 20th, 1999, I came home from work. I believe it was a Tuesday. And I put on the news. I think I'd heard on the radio of something happening, so I wanted to see it on the news. And I saw all these students running out of Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, and they had their hands on their heads, and there was police everywhere, police cars, and all these students were running out of their school in the daytime. And it had happened while I was at work, so I was watching a recording, and it was a very urgent, emotional moment, and not everything was known at this point, but there was apparently a shooting in the school, and the police were getting all the students out of the high school. Well, as it turned out, two 17-year-old boys walked into Columbine High School and started shooting at and killing their classmates. They ended up killing 12 students and one teacher on that day, April 20th, 1999. I got drawn into the emotion of it, of course, because I have compassion and I care about people, but I'm sure that many people got drawn into the emotion of that day and can remember it well, and probably remember where you were when that was on the news, if you were, an adult at that time or whatever, watching TV. I just want to say that it was a horrible moment, and I still remember it, but I wasn't there. The reason I'm bringing this up over 20 years later, in fact 22 years later, is because I was listening to a podcast entitled Confronting Columbine, and it was done by Amy Over, and she did a very good job. Amy is a survivor of Columbine. She was in the school that day, and she got rushed out by a teacher who was looking out for her safety and everybody else in the cafeteria, and that teacher got them to run out of the school. So she and her friends ran out of the school and ran to a neighboring house, and they hid under a table, and the neighbor didn't have a clue what was going on, and they didn't even know that neighbor, but he was kind enough to let them barge into his house and hide under his dining room table. Well, she tells the story of her experience that day. She tells the story of many people's experiences, and she interviews people. And to Amy's credit, she does a good job. The interviews are well done, and she has a lot of research she's done beyond her own experience. And I listened to this, and I was drawn in once again with emotion. I found myself crying as I listened to her interview people, and you heard what people went through, and it wasn't just a person like me watching it on the news, but it was people who were there, people who went through the trauma of that day. And it turns out that over 20 years later, they are still going through the trauma. Many of them have lost their marriages. Even their kids, in some cases, are not even in relationship with them anymore. One teacher was talking about how he is a Catholic, and how it was such a struggle for him with God, and how even to this day he feels guilt, and he not jumps out of bed, but he gets out of bed every day and recites the names of those who died on that day. And that's where this man lives, and he calls himself a man of faith, and I'm not doubting that he believes in Jesus, believes in God, but he was really the only person who talked about his faith and how that gave him strength to get through this. Most of the other people in the interview, including Amy herself, who's doing the interviews, are people who still struggle with anger. They're still struggling to some degree to make sense of it. Now, to Amy's credit, she helps other people work through their pain. She works with the Rebel Project. You can look it up, therebelproject.org, and they help people who go through mass traumas like this to process their feelings. And these interviews were filled with a lot of tears, emotion, some laughter as well, because old friends were reconnecting and realizing they have more to share than just their pain, some good memories. But it was evident that all of them were still struggling with a certain amount of raw sadness talking about this, and definitely anger. What was striking to me is that Amy talked about how the churches flung open their doors so that people could gather and process the pain of this horrible day. And I was impressed with that, you know, and the Catholic teacher said that Littleton was a place of faith before, and it's remained a place of faith all the way through it and afterwards, which I was just blessed to hear that. And of course, in the stories of Columbine, there are people who were Christians who were killed, and they had funerals. You know, all of them had funerals. There was 13 funerals, and these students and the people in their families attended these funerals, and so there was many opportunities to have Jesus help them process the pain. And yet here they were over 20 years later, still angry. And there was no talk about Jesus and no talk about how he helped them through it. Now, I'm not saying these people are not believers, and I'm not even making this video to criticize them or to judge them. I'm simply listening and hearing people who have not fully been healed, and they have not walked through this with Jesus Christ. And why I say that is because I believe there are many people beyond this tragedy, and there are so many tragedies in our world, so many, I mean, countless tragedies. Columbine became kind of a celebrity of mass shootings, which is a horrible thing to think, but it kind of did. It rose to the surface, and even to this day is very memorable. And yes, there have been many other mass shootings and many tragedies, too many to name, but this one stands out. And many of us have felt the pain of what these people went through, although not as deep as them. And so I would say this, that many Christians, no matter what trauma they've gone through in their life, do not know how to process their pain with Jesus. And I say this because I realize in my life, I've been a Christian since I was 12 years old, and it took me into my 30s to really know how to process pain with Jesus, to process hurt, anger, doubt, disappointment, discouragement, to really walk through the valley of the shadow of death with Jesus, to really understand what that Psalm 23 really even means and how to walk through it with him. I don't think everybody has that skill, and yet Matthew 11:28, Jesus says this, I have it in front of me. Jesus gives this invitation, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon me, take my yoke upon you, and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, your mind, your will that's been fighting to survive, and your emotions that have been battling so many things. You will find rest, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." This is an invitation from Jesus 2,000 years ago that still stands to this day. Jesus is still sending out an invitation to anybody who is experiencing pain or trauma, no matter how great, whether it is literally a massacre of tragic proportions like Columbine, or if it's simply being angry at somebody on the road because they cut you off, or trying to forgive a coworker, something that is much lighter, but still causes our hearts pain. And Jesus is reaching out right now, even through this video, to say, I want to walk through the pain with you. I want you to take my burden because it's light, it's easy, and what you're carrying is too hard for you, and I want to take it. And you know, I'm making this video because I believe everybody needs this skill, but so many people do not have it. And I don't want to criticize people. I don't want to condemn people. I just want to teach people how to really give it to Jesus. I'm going to just quickly tell you a story from my life, and I think I may have told it on another video, but I think it bears repeating. When I was a child, my parents were divorced, and I went through traumatic pain with that. And I don't blame them, and none of that. I'm healed now. So I'm telling you, as a healed person who's forgiven not simply my parents, but even forgiven myself for all the stupid things I've done in my life. And I am healed and free, and I want to pass this on to you. There was a moment when I was 10 years old where my dad came and picked my brother and I up for summer holidays, and he surprised us with taking us to Disneyland, which was a wonderful road trip that we just loved. It was so awesome. But at the end of the summer, when he dropped us off after that vacation, that emptiness, that pain hit me that he was leaving and going back to his city, which was hundreds of miles away. And he was going to leave me after such a wonderful time. And I burst into tears, and I cried so hard. I cried so hard that I almost vomited. It was so hard on me. And I was right in that cul-de-sac in front of all the houses, but I didn't care how hard I cried. And my dad started crying, and I believe my mom was crying, and I don't know how my brother took it, but it was such an emotional moment. Well, the thing is, for years and years, in fact decades, when anybody asked me about my childhood, the dark cloud of that particular moment would just come upon me like a heaviness that I couldn't escape, and I would almost cry. In fact, I teared up sometimes talking about my childhood in front of people. Well, fast forward to somewhere in the 2000s, I'll say 2004, where I was at a retreat, and the guest speaker invited people to come to the altar, to the front of the room, to really have some time with God. And I went forward and I said, I don't want to have this dark cloud anymore. I'm tired of it, and I feel embarrassed, starting to cry every time I talk about my childhood. And so this is exactly what I did, and I want you to learn from this, because I know if you're a human being, aren't you, that you're going to go through pain, and you're going to need to be able to give it to Jesus. And here's what I did. I remembered that moment in my life in that cul-de-sac in front of our house. And I could see everybody there. And for the first time, I saw Jesus there, because you know what? He was there. We didn't know him. None of us knew him. None of us worshiped him. None of us were Christians. But we were surrounded by his presence. We just didn't access it through faith. We didn't access the comfort that we could have received from Jesus. So in that moment at that altar, in my 30s, I said, Lord Jesus, I'm sorry at that moment in my life I did not turn to you. I didn't know you, and I want to ask you to forgive me for not giving my pain to you. I want to ask you to forgive me for not handing everything over to you and trying to battle it on my own. But right now, I invite you into that moment, and I give you the trauma and the pain of that moment in my life. I give it to you. I surrender it to you, and I invite you to take that pain. And he did. He took that pain, and that dark cloud was gone. It was completely gone. And I was free. I was free. And now I can talk about it, and I don't have a dark cloud. I don't feel like crying, and I don't feel embarrassed. Was it a sad moment? It always will be a sad moment. It will always be a sad moment, but I don't feel the pain of it anymore, because I truly invited Jesus into the moment and gave it to him. You know, Jesus wants people to be not simply forgiven technically. He doesn't simply want people to forgive in a technical sense, saying, I forgive you. He doesn't simply want people to say, that's over, that's in the past. Yes, all those things could be true, but your soul needs healing. Your heart needs healing. Your mind needs healing. And so I want to just show you a verse that you may have seen many times. You may have read it many times, but I hope that you will hear it like you've never heard it before. Jesus quoted this in the book of Luke. And so I'm going to read it from Isaiah 61. This is really Jesus speaking prophetically through Isaiah. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, To proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion, to bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. They will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. I believe that's what I am. I can talk about the pain of my past, knowing that Jesus has that pain. And I just simply have a memory that was painful. It is sad, but it's not making me sad. And Jesus wants this for you. So I want to invite you right now to say, Jesus, I give you this pain in my heart. I give you this trauma in my mind. I give you this anxiety in my spirit. I give you this sickness, this pain, this wound in my body. And I truly surrender it to you. And I invite you to bring your oil of joy. I invite you to bring a garment of praise and put it on me. I invite you also to set me free. I don't want to be captive to this anymore. I pray that you'll receive this. This is a skill that we all need. We all need it because we're all going to face pain. And yet we don't have to be prisoners of that pain. We can be free in Jesus. God bless you. Thank you for watching.